has your sleep been in the week that has just gone by? All right, so today we're going to speak about risk factors for poor sleep. The idea being to get an understanding of the things that could cause us to have poor sleep, and hence figure out how do we manage those factors to the extent that is possible to ensure that you get good sleep. So we look at the risk factors today, and then next week we look at the management of sleep. How do we ensure we get good sleep, right? So we look at illness and medication as factors that could lead to poor sleep habits, situational risk factors, environmental risk factors, and finally, we look at the effects of poor sleep. This, I think, would be a recap of some of the things we've talked about in the previous sessions. So, karibuni sana. So, one could experience poor sleep for a variety of reasons. One of those is when one is unwell, and it could be an illness that is transient, or it could be an illness that is chronic in nature. So, conditions such as asthma, hypertension, arthritis, headaches, head injuries, back injuries, the pain that usually is experienced with the illnesses could affect one's ability to fall asleep and to stay asleep as is necessary, right? Then we have psychiatric conditions, and here are just but some examples. There's so many others. So anxiety could affect one's ability to get good sleep and to stay asleep. Depression could affect someone's sleep. It is common that persons with depression would stay in bed for long, but when they wake up, they don't feel refreshed because the quality of the sleep ain't so good. Post-traumatic stress disorder could also affect one's sleep quality. Schizophrenia, bipolar. Guys who have bipolar tend to struggle with sleep when they're in the manic phase of the bipolar situation, because then they are so energized, just want to keep going. And sleep seems to be a thing that, is disruptive for them in that stage. Then again, on the other side, when they get into the depressive state, it's a challenge of a different nature, right? Then in the process of treating these illnesses, some of the drugs that are prescribed could also affect sleep, right? Now, before we get into the prescribed medications, let's talk about alcohol and caffeine. Guys take alcohol. Some people take it to relax. They say, I'm so stressed, I need to take alcohol. It will help me fall asleep. So granted, it will help you fall asleep because it has a sedating effect. The problem is that that sedating effect then affects the ability to get to the rapid eye movement phase of sleep, which is the most restorative part of sleep. So alcohol is problematic as to its effect on sleep quality. One, because it affects the sleep cycle. Two, when one takes alcohol, they tend to wake up a lot, and it could be the waking up of going to the toilet, but it could also be just disruptions in the sleep process, which can be determined using, if you have a sleep monitor, then you realize that when one has consumed alcohol, they have very many waking moments, some of which don't get them out of bed, but the sleep is disrupted, so that's problematic. Then there's caffeine. So we do love our coffee. And then there's the fact that coffee is a stimulant, and as a stimulant, it affects, for most people, it affects the sleep hormones, the generation there too. So if one is to take coffee late in the day, then the probability of their sleep being affected is high. Coffee has what we call a half-life of up to 5 hours, meaning that in 5 hours is when half of it will have cleared from the system. So if say you take coffee at 4 o'clock, 5 hours from that time is what? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock is when half of the coffee has cleared from your system. The other half is still available and circulating in the system. So if one is trying to go to sleep, then you find that catching sleep may be disruptive. And then if you do fall asleep, then same as alcohol, you find that the sleep cycle is interrupted, right? Then other medication, and this is not an exhaustive list, this is just illustrative, alpha and beta blockers for high blood pressure. So these medications, whilst they help to manage the blood pressure, they do affect the sleep cycle. So if one is taking them and is having sleep problems, it's best that they let the doctor know so that the doctor can see how to make modifications to ensure that they get sleep, because it is not intended that if you're taking these treatments, then you don't have good sleep. That could create other problems. And treatments for depression, like the SSRIs, have the effect of affecting sleep. Then for those who have very high cholesterol, they get what are called statins to help manage the cholesterol levels. And then these statins are known to affect sleep quality for some people. So this is just to let us know that sometimes the sleep is affected by things that are intended for good. Yeah. And so having that knowledge is important, and working with the professionals to sort of get a balance is critical. So the other thing that could affect sleep quality are some habits that we may adopt, So some people eat too close to sleeping time. It's recommended that you define your sleeping time and then eat no more than 2 hours prior to that sleeping time. So if you want to sleep at 9, then by 7 you should have eaten, not eating at 7. By 7 you should have done, you should dispense with the eating. If you want to sleep at 10, then by 8 you should have finished eating. The problem with eating close to the sleeping time is that that digestive process does disrupt the sleeping process. So you want to allow sufficient time for digestion to happen so that when you're going to sleep, then it's not a problem, right? The other thing is having erratic sleeping times. So some people don't have a designated sleeping time. So one day they're sleeping at 7, the next they're sleeping at 9, the next they're sleeping at 11, another day they're sleeping at 1 o'clock. And that is very disruptive. The sleep cycle is very consistent. So it's in the interest of anyone who wants to get good quality sleep to designate a specific sleeping time. and do whatever it takes to ensure that they sleep at that time on the regular. Otherwise, if it keeps changing, then chances that one's sleep is not optimal is very high, right? So taking coffee, I think that I already spoke about. Using technology late into the night. So technology here, we are talking about watching TV, using the laptop, using the phone, using the iPads, you know. These devices emit what is called blue light. And the blue light affects the sleep hormones. So what you want to do is to cut off from using technology like food at least 2 hours prior to your going to sleep time, right? Now, I know that may be a bit difficult for us with the phones, and yet it is practical. So it's something that one would, would start practicing progressively until you get used to it. And you realize that life actually continues even without us using our devices late into the night. There are those people who have televisions in their bedrooms. This is not good for sleep at all, right? It's not good for sleep. One, because of the blue light that it emits, and secondly, there's also the fact that some of the things that we watch may be anxiety triggering, So the recommendation is to keep TV away from the bedroom. Designate the bedroom for sleep, really. It should be just for sleep, and for the adults, then sleep and sex, and that's it. Not entertainment, watching TV. That one should be done in another room. Okay. Then doing exercises is a good thing. It tends to be problematic if it's done very close to sleeping time because it generates, endorphins. Yeah, and the chemicals that are generated on account of working out work counter to the sleep hormones. So you want to cut off your working out at least 2 hours to your sleeping time, so that you don't end up with a good thing causing problems on this other side of the equation for you, right? Okay. Then we have situational risk factors. So examples of these include shift work. So we say that we have the circadian rhythm, that determines the wake and the sleeping time. So you find that those who work shifts tend to also have, erratic sleeping times. So maybe I'm working night shift this week. Next week, I'm working a shift that is between daytime and nighttime. The other time, I'm working a shift that's daytime. So we find that the sleeping time is really not consistent. That poses a problem, right? The tendency for those who work night shift is not to really sleep when, okay, so they leave work in the morning. It's expected that they go home and sleep. They do try to sleep. Some of them don't get to sleep enough, Others even go and do other work. So we find that they really don't get the quantity and the quality of sleep that is desirable for them, as it were. Having elevated levels of stress is problematic. So it helps for one to know, am I stressed? Is it at a level that is concerning? What can I do to bring down this stress level so that then I can get my good quality sleep? Because what happens when we have elevated levels of stress is that cortisol goes up, and when cortisol goes up, then the sleep hormone goes down, So much as one may want to sleep, the sleep becomes elusive. So it's important to be able to manage the stress levels to, what is considered to be reasonable. One may be bereaved, and when you're bereaved, there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of strong emotions that one experiences, and hence one's sleep may be disrupted. And this, fortunately, is usually not something that lasts for too long. It helps that in that period of bereavement, one leans into community for support, right? Because if one is bereaved and is trying to go through that bereavement process alone, then it's really, really heavy on the individual. So working with the social support network is helpful, right? Sometimes we get out of our familiar environments, maybe you traveled for work or you've gone visiting friends, so you have an unfamiliar environment. For some people, that presents a problem with sleep. So I guess that one is time bound. Hopefully, after some time, it's not such an unfamiliar environment, and sleep then tends to come. Or otherwise, the time for being away is over, and you get to go back to what is familiar environment. Then you have jet lag as well. When you travel and then there's change in the time zone, that's usually quite something. So depending on the shift in hours, it may take a couple of days before one adjusts to the timing in that location. Either you've lost time or gained time. Your body is used to the timing at home. So that could affect sleep quality as well. Then looking at the environment, there's a couple of things that could affect sleep quality. So electronic devices in the bedroom, I think that you already spoke about. Noise is a factor, and especially intermittent noise is terrible. So if one is staying at a place where, the cars pass by and there's honking every so often, and there's revving of engines every so often, or there's music, that's blaring. There are people who are fighting and shouting and all that. Those could affect quality of sleep. And if it's something that happens on the regular, then you find that the individual would really be impacted, and it might be reason to consider change of environment. The temperature of the room. So for sleep to come effectively, we need relatively low temperature. So if the room is hot, then one may struggle to fall asleep and stay asleep. Again, if it's too cold, then one will struggle to fall asleep and stay asleep. So it's important to have, just about the right temperature. Recommended temperature is about 19 degrees centigrade. But for some people, even higher than that works. But if it goes, 25, 27, it becomes a bit much. So you find that when you travel to places where the temperatures are really high, then falling asleep becomes problematic. Of course, the other way around too, when it's very cold, it becomes really problematic. Light is a thing. So it is recommended that one gets, darkness in the room. So you don't want to try to sleep. Excuse me. You don't want to try to sleep with the lights on. That's not good. The lights ought to be off. Your curtains need to also keep light from outside coming in. Anything that's emitting light in the room should really be kept off. So like your phone, if it has a blinking thing, you don't want that. That will be a problem. If you have a clock that is blinking, that's problematic. You need total darkness in the room, for you to get real good quality sleep. Then, of course, if you have a bad bed and mattress, then even those can affect, the quality of sleep that one gets. Yeah, so all that being said, if you have poor quality sleep, there are many things that could potentially go wrong. Your immunity level goes down. And so susceptibility to a range of infections is high, colds, stomach aches, and stuff like that. We said that when people sleep, then we have memory formation happening. If you don't have good quality sleep, then you find that forming memory and the learning process is impacted. Sleeping helps to relax us and to refresh us. So if you don't get good quality sleep, then the tendency to be irritable and moody is high, and we are not very good company, as it were. The sex drive is affected, right? Because then the stress level is elevated. And when stress level is elevated, then we're on survival mode, and survival mode says we do what it takes to keep us safe. Sex is not a thing when you're thinking survival, so that becomes relegated to the backseat. So you really want to ensure that you have, good sleep so that the sex drive is not affected. We tend to have, poor vision as a result of, poor sleep, So it really is incumbent upon us to try and ensure that we get good quality sleep. Weight gain is a thing. When we don't have good sleep, we did mention in the previous one that the hormonal system is affected, and part of the hormones that are affected are the satiety and hunger hormones, we call ghrelin and leptin. So the hormone that signals to us when we are full isn't, I think, produced in sufficient quantity. So we may end up just eating more than we need because we are not feeling full, and then the hormone that signals hunger is in excess. So you may be experiencing the hunger pangs whilst you're really not hungry. So if you end up eating more than is required, then weight gain becomes a thing, right? Then headaches and migraines, as a result of not having sufficient sleep. What else is there? So higher levels of anxiety, risk of heart conditions, stroke, elevated blood pressure, increased risk for diabetes, because the system is on survival mode, So the body doesn't realize that there's no real danger. To the brain, danger is danger, real or imagined. So it's preparing the body for fighting the danger. And part of what is required is energy. So sugar levels go up, So the risk of developing diabetes becomes higher if one doesn't get enough sleep consistently over time. Yeah, symptoms of depression become elevated. There's increased risk for breast cancer. Yeah. So they say with less sleep, the melatonin that is required for sleep is not sufficient, and that has a linkage to breast cancer. So really, we want to guard against poor sleep, pretty much. That's what all these things are pointing towards. To the extent that is possible, we want to ensure that we get good sleep. You may ask me any questions now related to the presentation.
Now, my question is,
Yes.
Actually, the points are very good. I've learned a lot. There was a point on caffeine, and I was wondering, we see decaffeinated coffee. Is it just a marketing gimmick, or can someone take the decaffeinated coffee even a few hours before sleeping and it won't affect sleep?
Oh, well, the thing about decaffeinated coffee is that it has relatively less caffeine than the non-decaf coffee, but it still does have caffeine, So if one can do without it, the best not take it. If one is really into the coffee, then you may want to take it a little way earlier in the day, Yeah. But the effect, remains there, So if you're looking at the situation into the long term, you may want to make a plan on how to wean yourself out of taking coffee past midday, because
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, so there's a question here in the chat. Does working in shift cause sleep disorders? Some shift keep changing every 8 hours, therefore sleep cycles keep changing. Not sure that shift will cause sleep disorders generally, but could contribute to some of the sleep disorders happening, right? So if one is a shift worker, then I think that the big task is to be very deliberate about how they structure their sleep, very, very deliberate. Yeah, because that it will affect the quality of sleep is almost invariable. That you can make a bit of adjustments here and there to reduce the effect of the disruptions to sleep is something that one can be deliberate about.
Hi, Macreen.
Hello.
Yeah, Paula, about your call. We hope you feel better.
Thank you.
And thank you for braving it just to give us this session today. Okay, I have like two questions. One, I think a good number of us tend to charge our phones in the room because you set an alarm there to wake you in the morning. So, and you were talking about the blue light in the room. I don't know whether that's an unhealthy habit. And of course, there's a temptation when you wake up, the first thing you're doing is to scroll through WhatsApp and other social media, like what happened when I was asleep kind of thing. You want to catch up with the world. Yeah. Then the other question is, actually, I must admit, I'm a coffee addict. I don't know if I have a problem because I can actually take coffee and go to bed and completely black out. So I don't know if that's addiction or maybe my system doesn't work as effectively as I think it does, kind of thing. But I mean, I still sleep well, so I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, so on the matter of phones in the room, I think that's a matter of habit. And really, if the only reason we are keeping our phones in the room is to check time, then we need to buy alarms, a proper clock. They exist and they're inexpensive. Yeah, so that you then keep the phone away. Because the other thing about the phones is that they do emit electromagnetic frequency signals, yeah, which have been found to affect the sleep quality as well, So it's in our interest that, we keep them away and sort of get used to them not being there. If it's a question of timing, let's use the time device, and we'll be just okay. Now, when it comes to the consumption of coffee, it isn't the case that for everyone who takes coffee, they'll struggle to fall asleep. There are those who will take coffee and they will sleep. The question is, what is the quality of that sleep that they're getting? So when an objective measure of sleep is taken, then they tend to find that those who take stimulants tend to have, they tend not to have the rapid eye movement part of the sleep, which is an important part of the sleep. So yes, one will sleep, and then the quality of that sleep is the one that is impacted. Now, that over an extended period has the challenge of exposing one to higher risks of developing, lifestyle-related illnesses, So it is for that reason that the recommendation is made that, you want really to avoid taking coffee just before going to sleep, taking alcohol just before going to sleep, eating just before going to sleep, right? So it may well be that one is falling asleep. The quality of that sleep is what is usually the concern, and especially over the long term, if it's a repeated thing.